Morning, if you please rise to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And with that, I am going to open the public hearing on House Bill 1197 and invite the prime sponsor to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. Thank you all for the work that you do. For the record, my name is Chris Munns. I am one of the 4 representatives representing the town of Hampton in Rockingham District 29. I'm here to introduce HB 1197, of which I am the prime sponsor. The title of the bill is an act relative to criminal background checks. This is not about background checks for purchasers of firearms. It is about taking some small steps forward to hopefully expedite the process employers who are required by state law to obtain background checks must follow before they are able to hire certain employees. More specifically, it addresses those situations where a federal criminal history record information record check is required. If you are like me, any bill that is 11 pages long can be a little, shall we say, overwhelming. What I hope I can do in the time you're granting me this morning is try to dispel any concerns you might have. I worked with the Department of Safety to craft this bill, and they are here to speak in support of it. I also reached out to all the affected state agencies to ensure that they are aware of it. They do have some concerns about funding, which I appreciate and hope to address today. However, none expressed any serious reservations. I hope that they will not do so here today. Then again, that's why we have these hearings. Let me break down the bill for you. It essentially has 3 parts. Part 1, included in section 1 of the bill, which extends from page 1 through the first 3 lines of page 3, provides information on the laws and processes currently in place and the challenges they create as it relates to national record checks. Part 2, which is the lion's share of the bill, consisting of sections 2 through 23, starting on page 3, line 4, and continuing through page 9, line 31 of the bill, identifies specific changes in statute recommended by the Department of Safety to permit additional state agencies to assist them with the process of collecting fingerprints. Part 3, included in section 24 of the bill, starting on page 9, line 32 through page 11, line 3, establishes a multi-agency task force to conduct a review of all employment volunteer positions referenced in statute where an FBI record check is currently required, recommend whether such record checks will continue to be required, identify any new positions where a record check is currently not required, but where it should be, and identify other specific steps and recommendations that should be taken to ensure that employment-related record checks are processed as expeditiously as possible. This task force would also identify specific funding requirements. There are many positions where New Hampshire law requires employees and/or volunteers must pass a record check. Those positions fall under the purview of the following state agencies: education, banking, health and human services, safety, revenue administration, the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification, and the Lottery and Charitable Gaming Commission. There are also numerous municipal and county positions that require a record check. These record checks are required by state law to protect the public. However, we are facing a workforce crisis, and it has become increasingly difficult to fill in a timely manner many of the positions where these record checks are required. Candidates for a position are accepting other positions before the record checks can be completed, and the turnaround time on requests for volunteers often results in activities or events being understaffed or delayed. A national record check request must be submitted to the FBI, and the FBI requires that all requests submitted to it must be processed and transmitted by authorized law enforcement agencies. All requests submitted to the FBI must include a release form signed by the applicant that includes demographic data about them and a complete set of fingerprints. Under current state statute, fingerprints must be taken by a qualified law enforcement agency, for example, your local police department, or an authorized employee of the Department of Safety. That creates an inevitable logjam. The only exceptions are RSA 189-13-1, which provides an authorized employee of a school administrative unit, school district, chartered public school, or public academy who can also take a complete set of fingerprints, and RSA 361A2, which gives that same authority to an authorized employee of the banking department. Part 2 of the bill, sections 2 through 23 of this bill, what Part 2, Section 2 through 23 of this bill does is extend the authority to take a complete set of fingerprints to other state agencies and departments with oversight for other employees and volunteers where a record check is required. These are quick fixes that will significantly increase the number of individuals and locations authorized to collect complete set of fingerprints and address at least one logjam, contributing to the time it takes to obtain a national record check. The bill does not change the number of positions where a record check is required or the requirement that agencies will still need to forward the fingerprints and accompanying documentation to the Criminal Records Unit within the Department of Safety for their review and transmittal to the FBI, or the ways that they transmit that information. Those are more complex questions that deserve more and careful study. What Part 3, Section 24 of the bill does is establish a multi-agency task force to examine these and other issues. The task force will be chaired by the Commissioner of the Department of Safety and consist of representatives from the following agencies: Education, Revenue Administration, Health and Human Services, the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification, and the Lottery and Gaming Commission. The task force is also encouraged to consult with interested stakeholders such as the New Hampshire Municipal Association, New Hampshire Association of Counties, and the New Hampshire Banking Department and the New Hampshire School Administrators Association. The task force will present its initial findings on or before November 1st, 2024, so that if there are any expenditures required to implement any of those findings, there is an opportunity to include them in the next biennium's budget, and/or an opportunity to introduce any required legislation for the 2025 session. The task force's final report will be required on or before September 1st, 2025. When I first began to explore this issue, I thought, how hard can it be to reduce the turnaround time? All we need to do is scan the fingerprints, set up a website, push a button, send the request in, and receive a yes/no answer back within minutes, if not seconds. Well, with the help of my friends at the Department of Safety, I learned it is not that simple, and shame on me for thinking that anything could be that simple. After talking with representatives from the Criminal Record Unit and Assistant Commissioner Edwards, I am convinced they understand how important it is to quickly and accurately obtain criminal record checks, and they understand the need to be able to hire people quickly. My hope is that HB 1197 will offer them some quick fix additional tools to make that happen, while at the same time pulling together representatives of other state agencies who are most invested in this process to investigate other longer-term solutions. To ensure that happens, I hope you will recommend this bill as ought to pass. Thank you for your time this morning, and I will be happy to try to answer your questions, the key word being try. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. So just to distill it down, what your bill does is it attempts to speed up the record check process. It doesn't change who needs to have their record checks. It just deals with the process of getting the record checks. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Further questions? Representative Salig.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. You referenced costs in this, but I don't see a financial note, and I wasn't sure if I missed something.
Yeah, that was an issue that came up this morning when I was talking with some representatives of state agencies. I don't know why there was no fiscal note. I mean, the only reason I'm guessing is that because of the way that I structured it, so that there was the task force that would be making recommendations about what the cost would be going forward. But I don't know why there was no fiscal note attached. The cost there will certainly be some costs, and when people from the Department of Safety come to testify, you might want to ask them. There will be some costs for perhaps for additional scanning machines, and potentially some personnel costs. But to answer your question, I don't know why there was no fiscal note.
Representative Muse.
Yes, thanks for taking my question. Help me understand why there are some changes in your bill that would take place immediately with passage of the bill, but there are others that are deferred until a task force can be assembled and make recommendations. I'm just curious about your rationale for doing that.
Well, what I wanted to do was, I guess, address the policy issue of whether or not other state agencies should be empowered to be able to collect fingerprints, so that the Department of Safety then kind of knew the universe that they were working with, and that could then they could then work with those agencies to kind of figure out exactly what infrastructure would be needed to support that. I had some conversations with people this morning along those same lines, and there was a suggestion that perhaps the effective date for the bill could be pushed out a little bit, but it was really just to try to get the ball rolling, so that we and give the department the statutory authority that they need to start, figuring out what the new infrastructure should look like.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for introducing your bill.
Thank you very much.
The chair calls Victor Muzzy from the State Police.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Victor Muzzy. I'm a captain with the New Hampshire State Police in charge of the Justice Information Bureau, and I'm here to represent the Department of Safety on this bill. And I'd like to thank Representative Munns for working together ahead of submitting this to make sure that there was a mutual understanding of what was needed to help us, certainly. But I think to answer what I heard to be sort of the initial question is, as he spoke, the record check process for education has already been identified. So it allows an authorized employee of the Department of Education to fingerprint folks for us. And so many other RSAs at the moment don't do that. So it sort of ties our collective hands as law enforcement, being the only folks that can fingerprint for these other various entities and agencies. And so aligning all of these statutes certainly opens up that window for us to be able to do that, and allow some of these other state agencies to be able to capture fingerprints for us, much like Department of Education is doing in the superintendent's offices and things. And so that was one idea that we had brought up in the confines of the conversation to help address some of the backlog or some of the issues. And so right now, to date, we've got, I think, 75 APHIS machines, which are the electronic machines that we capture fingerprints on, placed strategically as best we can throughout the state. And we've got another 10 more of those coming that we will implement here very shortly, as soon as we can accept some grant money that will use to purchase those with, and as we have historically done. And so the intent here, in concert with this bill, would be to provide some of these machines to those agencies willing in the future that could fingerprint their folks for us as part of that process. And there's been some interest with some agencies, and I suspect more interest once we get the RSAs cleaned up to better align with that, to be able to actually have them capturing the fingerprints for us. And so that was one area where historically, I'll say since 2020, I think let's call 2020 the year that caught up with us. And there was several things that happened outside of COVID, but related to COVID, that caused a backlog for us. And the governor had issued an order, obviously, allowing folks to work without being fingerprinted and things. And when that order was lifted, we saw a huge influx and an overwhelming workload that we have since completely cleared up. And I'm happy to say here today that we've got 5 available fingerprint appointments in Concord, and I think 21 tomorrow or something thereabouts. And so obtaining a fingerprint appointment at the moment is not an issue. And coupled with that, the turnaround time for providing record checks for agencies that are doing a background check is done within a week from our perspective, the Department of Safety's perspective. So the backlog is for all intents and purposes cleared up, is non-existent. It does not exist anymore. However, in the interest of expanding upon that, I think this bill here to align these RSAs respective to that of education is the right thing to do, so we can continue to expand that allowance, I should say, to capture fingerprints. And so again, I just wanted to point out that we no longer have the backlog that we had. We've worked through that, but obviously it takes some time to catch up from that. And the education, I guess, to understand that that's no longer really a problem for us. Doesn't mean it won't happen again. We certainly have busier times of the year than other times, back to school and other things that are happening, college graduations and whatnot, that seem to contribute to that, but nothing like we saw in 2020. And so, we obviously will work very closely. The commission, I think, will work very closely with on determining what needs to be done. I think collectively we probably should look at what background checks are we conducting. Certainly the Department of Safety has no, I don't want to say interest. We have an interest in it, but we have no say, I guess. It's up to these other agencies, state agencies, on whether or not they want to do background checks. We certainly are there to provide that service, but don't really have an opinion, I suppose, on whether or not it's appropriate, but certainly would love to be part of the conversation. So it probably is time to look at, are there other positions that should be checked? Are there some that we're doing now that we don't need to do? So this is a great time to look at that process overall and see if we can make any efficiencies there on a state level. I think there was one other thing that I was going to say, but it escapes my mind at the moment. So thank you for hearing my testimony, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Is it your understanding that this bill will enable you to enter into agreements with various agencies to place APHIS machines in their locations? Is that, and then authorize them to process those? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think that's the intent. I don't know that the changing the RSA speaks to the MOU that we would have to have, but it certainly will allow us to physically put the machine there and have authorized, employees of that agency fingerprint for us. The MOU, I guess I would see that as sort of a separate, distinct process that we would probably have to enter into, as we've done in other instances.
Since you already have and are continuing to put these machines spread out throughout the state, is it necessary to then put them in specific agencies like that? I mean, I could see maybe OPLC because they're constantly, but a school district, does that make sense? I'm not really sure I understand how that would work.
Yeah, we've had a couple of school districts that have actually done that, and the way I can think of one in particular, where the APHIS machine, it's a portable machine that the police department actually houses, I guess, but where it's portable, they bring it to the school to be able to use it for that purpose too. And so they've sort of collaborated within that town or that district to be able to do that. And so is there a need? Not at the moment, I guess. I think it's more of a convenience factor. What we've heard from some agencies is that some of their clientele have to travel great distances and other things. So obviously most of these machines for state agencies would likely be in Concord, which again is probably not convenient for some of the population anyways, but it's just another option, really. And before I forget, the other thing to mention is we have been, I guess, graced with the ability to purchase LiveScan machines through grant money. They're about $20,000 a piece. What we don't have any funding for other than budgeted funding is the maintenance for those machines. And so relative to the costs right out of the gate, I can say the more of these machines we buy, the more maintenance we're going to have to pay on them. And we've yet to be able to find a funding source outside of our budget to be able to pay for that. And maintenance, I think, on a per machine is about $3,500 a year, and an additional $200 if there's a printer that goes along
Does
with the machine.
Nick's money cover that? Could it be used towards that? Nick's grants?
No.
No.
Nope. We historically have bought the machines with NCHIP money, which is the National Criminal History Improvement Project, I believe is what that stands for.
I envision the machines that they have, for example, at Silencer Co. If you want to go buy a suppressor, they take your prints right there instantly to the FBI, and you quickly get a yay or nay.
I'm not familiar with that arrangement, but
It's part of the instant background check system.
Yep.
But this is different than the instant background check system, correct?
Correct.
Is the records you get for an employment check are not the same for the instant background
No.
check. You just get a proceed or do not proceed.
Right.
Versus this, you get the actual list of the offenses.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Depending upon the agency and
What they're authorized to see.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Okay. Representative Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may have been addressed, and I apologize if it was. So my understanding is, you can have somebody that has had their fingerprints taken, say to work at a school, and maybe they go get a job as a bank, as a teller. Would this make it where if the person has already had their information captured, that they don't have to keep on redoing it to maybe pull from a central location, or no?
No. Every check is done independently for the purpose that it's needed. So if they switch professions, it's a brand new check. And the other thing that gets cautioned is stale records. So if you were fingerprinted yesterday and your record is released today, tomorrow your record could be different in theory. So
Okay. May I
it doesn't really transpire time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for my follow-up. This may be something you're not sure of. There was a study committee for the centralization for fingerprints for background checks. Do you think that is something maybe, I know I was on it and we've never had a meeting on it. Do you think that's something I should try to maybe pursue a little bit more, or would it not affect this at all? Make it life easier for everybody?
Don't know that it would affect this at all, I guess.
Okay.
So
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Representative here, Gathright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. On page 2, when it lists the 7 departments, are these departments, are the departments you would like to have that privilege of doing background checks?
These are the departments that I would like to have the potential of having a machine to take fingerprints should they choose to, I guess, or
Okay.
have the manpower. I mean, sure.
All right. Are the only one that's doing it now is the education department? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So from a cost perspective, your assumption would be that the agencies who receive these machines would use them, essentially would train current personnel
Correct.
in their use, so it wouldn't involve actually hiring any people.
I don't believe so, unless those agencies would have a need to hire additional resources to be able to do that. I can't speak to that, but I think the intent, at least my thought, would be that yes, they'd have pre-existing employees that would be trained and would be able to do that.
And one more. And a little bit of a different question. The fact that these, one thing I'm trying to understand is there, because more people will be responsible for fingerprinting, is there more potential for these records to be mishandled in some way or made public in a way that we wouldn't want?
Yep, no, great question. So currently, and I'm probably getting into the weeds here a little bit too much, but I'll give you the background anyhow. As far as law enforcement agencies go, the interface, I'll call it, to Department of Safety is a two-way interface. So in other words, a law enforcement officer takes a set of fingerprints on their machine, and within 10 or 15 minutes, they actually get an initial response from the FBI, which includes some of that person's criminal record. And that's done so that the FBI doesn't care what your name and date of birth is. They care what your fingerprints look like, and that's how they identify everybody. So I've put in a name that I associated with those fingerprints, and it gets sent to the FBI. And oftentimes, people lie when they get arrested about who they are and things like that. And so that information is provided back to that machine in the form of a message, if you will, so that I guess that department or that officer can see that, okay, I have the correct person here, and a little bit about their criminal record and things like that relative to bail and things like that. So the intent and the idea here would be the configuration for these machines that are at these agencies would be one way. So they would only be submitting fingerprints to us, the Department of Safety Criminal Records Unit, and not receiving any return information from the FBI. And so there would not be that chance in that capacity or in that venue for them to mishandle anything or even have access to any information on the machine. So they'd be configured slightly differently, I guess, than the law enforcement agency's configuration.
To follow on to that question, using the machine is even better because there's no physical record, there's no fingerprint card that can be copied or anything like that, correct? It's just all sent out and gone.
Yeah, and the theory with, the old inked fingerprint cards, as they say, is you've got ink, which is messy, and you're dealing with a piece of paper and things, and the AFIS machines are pretty intuitive, I guess, and obviously capture a picture of your fingerprint, which is cleaner and clearer and lends to less error, I guess. And so really the only concern is making sure that we would train these folks, I'll say a core cluster of these folks at each agency that would be authorized by way of these statutes to take those fingerprints. And we do that now with several different agencies anyway to make sure they're taking quality prints and understand what they're doing and why they're doing what, how to do it the right way and things. And so really, the good news there, and the only other concern is, well, what happens if these people aren't as well trained as the law enforcement agencies and entities and things? And we've got, I guess, scenarios now where we're dealing with non-law enforcement folks that are involved in the criminal justice information gathering process, and it seems to be working well. And the better news is that they're submitting that stuff to us, and they're also submitting the paperwork that goes along with the background check to us. And so we have the opportunity at the Department of Safety to make sure that we are validating, I guess, the information that we're seeing electronically against the paper records that we would be getting from them to process the entirety of the check. And so there's a couple of checks and balances in the process to make sure that, again, non-law enforcement folks that would be involved in this process, not that they would intentionally do anything wrong, but, errors and mistakes aren't happening because it's all coming to us and we can verify and validate before we would submit anything to the FBI.
See no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair calls Attorney John Williams from DHHS.
Chairman Roy and members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, for the record, my name is John Williams. I'm the Legislative Director for the Department of Health and Human Services, and I'm here today to provide information to this committee relative to HB 1197. HB 1197, as you've already heard from the bill sponsor, certainly comes to you with very important goals here, which is to allow for those who are employed at least in the sections referencing the department, or volunteering in certain areas, to making sure that they're being appropriately screened, but given the option to having those particular set of fingerprints taken by those executive branch agencies identified in the legislation. It's already been identified that the bill does not have a fiscal analysis from the Legislative Budget Assistance Office. As you know, the attorneys who draft the legislation make a determination working through the Office of Legislative Services whether or not that there is an impact greater than $10,000. If you refer you to RSA 1444, that requires that all bills having a fiscal impact greater than $10,000 shall have a fiscal note on it. The good news is that if it wasn't identified for a robust fiscal analysis so you could understand the appropriation issues and other resource issues required, under RSA 1446, Roman 5, again, that's 1440:46 Roman 5, which is under the Legislative Budget Assistance Office statutes, that this committee is vested, like all other standing committees, both in the House and the Senate, under that RSA, to, upon a motion of a committee member, to having, in of course with the majority of the committee, having a fiscal analysis done in the bill. That would perhaps be helpful to this committee and any other committee where this bill may travel, so you get a better understanding with some baseline information as to the economics behind the bill. The department is here specifically on two specific sections of the bill. I think that section 1 of the bill that the sponsor and working along with the Department of Safety did a wonderful job describing in section 1 of the bill the current process. And you'll see that it's an incredibly detailed and important process that's followed when they're doing these particular criminal background checks. And as it relates to various agencies with this 24 plus section bill, there are two sections that I'm here today on, not on the other sections, but section 7 of the bill and section 9. So drawing your attention to page 1, and I'm going to get my glasses because I think it's probably a different number. It's page 4. And at the very bottom, starting on line 36, it discusses in section 7 the use of cannabis for therapeutic purposes and the alternative treatment requirements. And it continues on the following page, on page 5, relative to the requirement that individuals who are agents under therapeutic cannabis programs are required to.
It's in here. Yeah.
Page 4,
Page 4.
line 36, section 7. I need to slow down is what I need to do.
Yeah. And number 36 down the
Oh,
front.
I see. Okay, section 7. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Carry on.
And Chairman Roy, it would not be the first time I'd be testifying on the wrong bill and apologizing. So here we go. So as you see, moving to the second page, starting from lines 1 through line 16, there's an amendment that would add the following to the sentence. The applicant, meaning the Alternative Treatment Center or their agents, shall submit with a release form a complete set of electronic fingerprints taken by a qualified law enforcement agency, which is your local municipal level law enforcement agencies, or in current law, but struck here, an authorized employee of the Department of Safety. And now this is the additional part, or an authorized employee of the Department of Health and Services. So our read of this particular section as it relates is a shall, it's a mandatory. And the effective date of this legislation, which I certainly will get to as part of my commentary, is upon passage, at least for this section. So the representation I would make to this committee, not knowing the exact answers, because certainly working with the Department of Safety and perhaps also other agencies that currently are doing this, we can get a better handle on the resources that are necessary to doing this. Clearly, there's likelihood of greater than $10,000, at least as it relates to our sections of the bill, for getting these very important machines. We actually did a pilot within the last decade where we were starting to do very much what this bill is suggesting to help with the backlog. It was very good to hear from the testimony from the Department of Safety, from Captain Muzzy, that they are, and I don't want to overquote because it's obviously recorded, but that they have caught up with the backlog, which is great news to hear. So those individuals, particularly who are seeking employment at various, can certainly be employed sooner than later. I now want to draw your attention on the same page, page 5, to line 27. Page 5, line 27, which is section 9 of the bill dealing with residential care and child placing agencies. So as you'll see here, this also requires that a criminal background check through the FBI is required for individuals who are employed by child care agencies. Giving you the numbers, there are thousands of individuals who do this very important work for the state of New Hampshire. So the position that this could be absorbed using current resources, I think at least in this specific instance, and I think providing that information to safety would be helpful to for them to understand that our current staff are already dedicated to reviewing licensing and other issues in this particular area, and that if we're required now to take on the additional responsibility, as I mentioned, we're talking over thousands of individuals, that it would be contemplated that we'd need an additional staff position or at least a part-time staff position to be able to accomplish what is required under this legislation. So with that said, I just would respectfully request that this committee consider the fiscal implications as it relates to the legislation, and perhaps on motion of a member of this committee, have the LBA directed to completing a financial analysis so that you, the bill sponsor, Department of Safety, would have a better understanding as to what it would take in terms of the resources. At the end of the day, we go to section 24 of the bill, and rounding the corner towards the end of my commentary. is the task force that's created. Just a couple of quick items for your consideration as a part of that is you'll note that the reporting date for the initial report was very thoughtfully put on November 1st of 2024. And my understanding in speaking with the bill sponsor, who's a wonderful person, I've worked with him many times in the past, he cares very much about New Hampshire citizens, that the first report would be an opportunity to provide the legislature with feedback in terms of what these costs were to be built into the 26-27 budget. I would respectfully say because the effective date is upon passage, this would be in 2025. We do not have any appropriations, and I'm sure the Department of Safety that performs this current function now already has within their budget at least identified certain resources to making their shop be able to do what they do. But we do not, and I'd represent to this committee, we do not have the resources to be able to do what this legislation contemplates. So at a minimum, going to the last page on the effective date for your consideration, you may want to consider pushing that out to June 30th of 2025. That's the end of the biennium of the current budget, to allow for a thoughtful response in the task force report as to identifying necessary resources and any language changes, because I do understand that the goal here is to establish a policy in this legislation. It would have been the department's preference to keep the task force portion of this bill and have this further issue explored, but I do understand and appreciate after my conversation with the bill sponsor that there's a desire to set the policy now, not later. It is an option, and one that we were certainly going to suggest to the committee to consider having that language shelf ready for HB2 as part of the next biennium budget, rather than mandating items without having an appropriation associated with it, even if you do push out that particular effective date. So with that said, the only other drafting consideration, Chairman Roy, that I would suggest to the committee, that on page 10 of the bill, you'll see under Roman D 3, which is the last series of the duties of the items that they're going to be reviewing for this task force, that there be consideration to putting in additional language that would say something to the effect of identify necessary funding and other resources, including staffing and other IT issues for the state executive branch agencies and, importantly, political subdivisions, because you'll see that beyond just touching upon our agency and other state agency, it also touches upon political subdivisions within the state. So their input would be particularly important. The other item for your consideration, because I know that the legislature typically allows for late filed legislation if recommendations are coming from legislative created commission's task force. In this occasion, we in the task force, you have the Department of Safety, the commissioner being the lead, and then the state agencies. There's no reference to a legislature, and I apologize to Bill Sponsor. It's just something I picked up on when I was reading through the language again for the third time over the last few weeks, that there may be some consideration to having a legislator, because that would carry a greater weight than to getting it into either the budget or some type of remedial legislation if you determined that what is in the four corners of this very important bill that need to be changed or tweaked based upon the information. So it's the cart and horse analysis essentially that we would propose. With that, and leaving some oxygen in the room, that concludes my commentary before the committee, and I am available to take questions.
Thank you. With regard to the two sections you pointed out that you said would incur an immediate cost, the way I'm reading it, I may be wrong, it says or. It doesn't say, it says shall be completed by a qualified law enforcement agency or an authorized employee. So how do you read that to be that you have to do that right away?
And Representative Roy, that is a great question. And I am an active member of New Hampshire Bar. My current role is legislative, so I'm here in my legislative capacity, and I'm sure you can ask the question of others who will be coming to testify, that I think there's enough ambiguity there, because if the public sees this, there's going to be an expectation that they're going to be able to come to the Department of Health and Human Services if they're seeking a job in the child care with a child care agency as a worker, that we're going to be up and running on the effective date of this bill. And I think that that's not a fair representation of that. And it's possible that your thoughts that this is discretionary would be one review and one a certain position on the language, but the regular public is just going to read this and saying, why aren't they opening up shop here? And our response is because we don't have the resources, nor do we have a memorandum of understanding, which does not require legislation. We can work those out with the Department of Safety Also, we're talking about certification and training for the staff. It's not just a matter of using existing staff, it's staff that are trained and certified in this very important area around confidentiality issues and how to run it. So I know it's a little bit longer winded, but I think the answer to your question is I think you raise a good point that it could be viewed as discretionary. We're taking a more cautious approach that one could make the similar argument because of the word shall. And right now, particularly in the area of the first one I identified with the shall, if they could go to a local law enforcement, a person walks up there, they're going to take their fingerprints, or the Department of Safety. So it's not like safety can say, oh, did you try your local law enforcement agency? It's in statute. You could go there. It's an or. And I would imagine the public would say, nope, you're responsible for doing this because it's in law. But I do agree with you that your take on that is a reasonable, that is discretionary.
Representative here at Guthrie.
Thank you for taking my question. What was the date that you wanted to push out?
Yes. So if we go to the final page of the bill on page 11 on line 7, it currently reads, the remainder of the act shall take effect upon its passage. And it's just a suggestion to this committee that if the goal here is to align this, as the bill sponsor very thoughtfully said, to be built into the budget, you really have to have the other language aligned with that to allow that opportunity to take place. And if you want to establish policy now, that effective date should be June 30th of 2025, which ends the biennium for the current budget, June 30th, 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
And thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify on this bill who wasn't testified? Seeing none, I'm going to appoint a subcommittee on this. Representative Rhodes, Representative Muse, Representative Mannion, Representative Newman. I'd like a 2-week turnaround. Please address the concerns raised by DHHS and work with the sponsor and the Captain Muzzy, please. And that I close the public hearing.
Maybe Monday.
I hereby open a public hearing on House Bill 1295 and invite the sponsor to introduce the bill.
Good morning. I am actually going to be introducing this bill on behalf of Representative Vail, the prime sponsor. I'm also a co-sponsor on the bill. As it currently stands, therapeutic cannabis patients are held to a higher legal standard simply by virtue of their status as a particular, as needing a particular form of relief. In the event that they commit the same exact crime as anyone else in the state, they face a higher charge. Now, personally, I think this is interesting because the defining factor as to whether or not someone is certified as a qualifying therapeutic cannabis patient is a health matter. It's not a moral matter. If, in fact, they do transgress in that way, they already, and still will if this bill is passed, will have their certification revoked, and they will be subject to the existing charges for this crime, which is sale of cannabis. What this bill does is simply remove the legal inequity while leaving the consequences of revoking one's certification. It is a straightforward measure, and I believe it deserves a straightforward recommendation from this committee of OTP. Thank you for your time and consideration. I have passed around the prime sponsor's letter to the committee, and I'm happy to take questions, but I also see that Representative Wendy Thomas is here, and she probably can probably answer them better than I can.
Thank you. Anyone else? Representative Thomas? No questions. Unless see any. That's Thomas. I think she might.
Good morning, honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is Wendy Thomas. I represent the town of Merrimack, Hillsborough 12, and I support this bill. Okay, so the therapeutic cannabis program in New Hampshire was established in 2013. That's 11 years ago. And it was passed by an admittedly older legislation. New Hampshire's known for having members that tend to be a little older. The significance of this is that our generation, the older generation, was taught that cannabis is a horrible drug. It's used by black people. It's used by brown people. It's used by criminals. When we established this program, people saw the need for a therapeutic cannabis program to be established in New Hampshire. However, they couldn't really disengage from the cannabis equals criminal activity. And so we allowed the program to go forward, but we put in very significant guardrails because some people believed that this was going to initiate criminal activity in New Hampshire. Guess what? 11 years later, it has not. For the record, also, I am a patient in the therapeutic cannabis program. I have been since 2017. And since 2017, there has not been one day that I have not used therapeutic cannabis. I use it for chronic pain. And in the last 2 years, I use it for cancer. So in addition to this, recently the U.S. government has released a report with the findings that cannabis is not addictive, cannabis is not a gateway drug, and cannabis is effective as medication. This is really good news for those of us in the program. So I understand when the program was established that we wanted guardrails in there. We thought there was going to be all of these bad people. Remember the hoopla when we established dispensaries around New Hampshire, and everybody was like, not in my neighborhood, not in my neighborhood. We have a dispensary in Merrimack, and nobody even knows it's there. It's very discreet. It's very quiet. This is a self-policing program. If you get into trouble, we expect to be punished. I mean, we're not above the law. But if we get into trouble because of the program, our card, our access to the program is also revoked. No one wants to take that chance, certainly not someone who's sick. So I'm just here to remind you that just because we are sick, just because we need effective medication, that does not make us criminals. And so hold us accountable just as you would everybody else. But just because we use cannabis, don't give us extra penalties. I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you. So the current state of the law is if you are a member of a cannabis program and you purchase your cannabis from a dispensary and you sell it to someone, you would be subject to the penalties of 318B26.
Correct.
And if someone else gets arrested for selling marijuana, they too would be subject to 31826, correct?
There are, and I know that Michael Holt is in the audience too. There are added penalties just for being in the cannabis program.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
What are the added penalties? Do you want me to just defer to?
Yes, if you could.
Okay, sure, that's fine.
He would answer it better than I could.
Okay. Representative Salik.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking my question. And I apologize when I bolt out in a moment. I'm going to go meet my elementary schoolers. But could you explain a little bit about what are the currently legal in New Hampshire reasons why people would be able to get therapeutic cannabis?
So to get in the program, there is an application. And on the application right now, we have listed criteria. So you have to have a significant chronic illness, a terminal illness, PTSD is included. So there's a list of criteria. The problem with that is that the physicians have to use that list. And there are other things that could apply. For example, menstrual cramps. Cannabis is very, very helpful for menstrual cramps. Long COVID, we're finding that people are getting IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, not Crohn's disease. So technically that would not fit into the program. However, cannabis greatly helps digestive issues. So we're trying to change that. I've got a bill right now in that would let any physician who is knowledgeable of cannabis recommend the program. They can't prescribe the program. They can recommend the program to any patient whom they think it would benefit. So it would keep us from practicing medicine and coming back every year, putting in new criteria. But we do have established criteria.
Representative Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question.
Yes.
So the cannabis that you're speaking of is a prescription, correct?
No.
Medical cannabis is not a prescription?
Medical physicians, so MDs and people who are qualified, and I think we had nurse practitioners, they can recommend the program. They cannot prescribe the program because of how it is scheduled, and it's an illegal substance according to a federal. But they're changing that. They're in the process of changing it. So it is not a prescription. It is a recommendation. However, then you work with people in the dispensary who have knowledge. And I used to work in a dispensary. So the first thing we would do is sit down with a patient, go over their medical history, match up their symptoms, and get them onto a therapeutic cannabis program, low and slow, which means that you start off with a tiny amount.
Thank you for your testimony. Oh, excuse me, Representative Muse.
So I'm a little confused. So because of the way we define a prescription, you're saying that there isn't another provision in New Hampshire law that would actually make it illegal for somebody to give their therapeutic cannabis away to somebody else or to sell it to them? Is that
No.
okay?
No, I'm not. Maybe this is lost in translation. No, if I purchase cannabis through the program, and then I wanted to sell it to somebody, that's illegal, whether I'm in the program or not. You look like you're a little confused. Still.
Follow up. So the thing that makes it illegal is this specific statute, or is there another statute where that conduct would be prohibited under New Hampshire law?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I believe that it's this statute. However, so this addresses therapeutic cannabis specifically. However, if somebody sells cannabis on the street, you're saying that I'm not sure. I think Director Holt would be the one to answer that.
Go ahead.
I think the root of it is just my confusion over whether or not there may be a redundancy in our law. So, for example, do we have two laws in New Hampshire that cover this conduct? One is in this statute and one is maybe somewhere else?
I believe that that's what's happening. Yes. So there is a penalty for selling cannabis if you're not in the program. If you are in the program, you have that same penalty with an added penalty just because you're in the program.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Michael Holt.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Holt. I'm the administrator of the Therapeutic Cannabis Program with the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm happy to answer questions. I didn't plan to testify, but I'm sure I can help a little here and illuminate the technicalities of the bill. The department doesn't take a position on this bill. As the sponsor and Representative Thomas indicated, there is an extra penalty for therapeutic cannabis patients in New Hampshire state law if they sell cannabis to somebody else. RSA 318B, as referenced in the bill, creates penalties for anyone who sells cannabis. It's 318B26, a whole section on penalties that includes the sale of cannabis. When the therapeutic cannabis law was passed in 2013, an additional provision was added to 318B26, and that's referenced in lines 7 and 8 of the bill, the repeal. So 318B26 Roman 9A establishes an additional penalty. That additional penalty, in addition to the penalties that already exist for selling cannabis for anyone, the additional penalty establishes for any amount a Class B felony, a maximum term of imprisonment of not more than 7 years, and a fine not more than $300,000. In addition to the 200,000 or 500,000 or the other felonies involved with selling cannabis. So what the intent of this bill, as I believe it, is to eliminate the extra penalty for therapeutic cannabis patients if they are convicted of selling any cannabis to an unauthorized person.
To the best of your knowledge, is there a similar law that affects people that sell their prescription drugs? Like if I have a prescription for oxycodone and I sell it, is there a double penalty for that, or just cannabis?
I'm not aware of any extra penalty for the sale of a prescription medication.
Except for cannabis.
Correct.
Thank you. Representative Muse.
And I know your knowledge is primarily of New Hampshire, but I wonder, are there other states that sort of have this two-tiered penalty for people who sell therapeutic cannabis?
I'm not aware of any state that does, but I'm not aware of any state that doesn't.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for your testimony this morning.
You're welcome.
Chair calls the Honorable Maria Perez. Can you check and see if she walked onto the hall?
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. My name is Maria Perez. I'm a state representative from District 43 in Milford. I'm here in speaking in support of 1295. As someone who suffers from chronic illness, I have chronic Lyme disease, and right now I'm dealing with illness on my kidneys. That's one of the reasons that I'm supporting this bill, because there's many people like myself that suffer with chronic illness that we wish to be able to use cannabis without being penalized. And that's one of the reasons that I'm asking the committee to support this bill.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Perez? Seeing none, thank you for sharing this morning. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on this bill who was not testified on this bill? Excuse me, Representative Sitek, you have a question?
Mr. Holt, actually, I'm wondering, what are typical doses at large? What are typical doses of therapeutic cannabis?
Thank you for the question. Everybody metabolizes cannabis a little differently. And so I have worked and I have met some people that use 100 milligrams as a dose. Now, if I had 100 milligrams, I would be asleep. You can't overdose. I mean, you'll just, it's not like alcohol. You're not going to end up in the ER. You're just going to go to sleep. When I take a dose, I average between 2.5 and 10 milligrams. 10 is a bit high. So I take 2.5 to 5 during the day. I usually take it twice during the day. And you're never going to see me inebriated, because that's, if you're using the therapeutic program to get high, you're using it incorrectly. It's to manage our symptoms. So I take the lowest dose that I need to manage my pain, and then I take 10 milligrams in the evening, and that helps me sleep through the night. So I take what are called microdoses. So that's why it's very difficult to prescribe it. You need somebody who understands how it works with the human body. And typically, even with patients that have experience with cannabis, we start them at 2.5 to 5 milligrams.
Thank you.
I think it's got a hot follow-up.
It's just amazing because 27 grams make an ounce. So these are very tiny amounts.
Yes, that's the whole, again, the therapeutic cannabis program is not to get inebriated.
Thank you. Representative Muse?
Just one more question. How, when this is actually dispensed, when therapeutic cannabis is dispensed, are we talking about something the size of a coffee can, something the size of a
gosh.
prescription bottle, drug bottle? I mean, how much of it actually commonly gets dispensed?
So first of all, it depends how you take it. So I very rarely smoke cannabis. I cough, I'm not good at that. The only time that I smoke cannabis is when I'm in very severe pain because it hits the pain like that, but then I can't drive, I can't read, I can't do anything except watch TV and eat Doritos. But some people take capsules. And the capsules could be 2.5 or 5 milligrams or, even higher. I have cream that's infused with cannabis. And so I use that on my joints because I have arthritis from Lyme disease. I use edibles. I use gummies most of the time. That's probably the biggest thing. So it's usually sold in up to ounces. So you're looking at, if you've seen the pictures of cannabis, the flower, the bud, like 1 to 2 buds would be, how much it's dispensed as. In New Hampshire, we're only allowed to buy 2 ounces of cannabis at a time. There's a bill going forward that would allow 4 ounces, which would bring it into line with what's being proposed for the legalization of cannabis program.
Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, the amount allowed monthly is based on is it the grams of THC, not necessarily. In other words, you could buy a batch of brownies. That doesn't count. The weight of the brownies isn't. It's
Correct.
It's the amount.
It's the product.
Right.
And I just want to correct. You said monthly, and it's not monthly. We can buy every 10 days.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But my point was, it's not calculated based on the weight of the product you're buying. It's the amount of the THC or marijuana. That's
Correct.
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 Thank you.
Right.
All right. Representative Newman.
I just want to clear up the difference between CBD and THC. It's the amount of not THC, medical cannabis. It's the amount of THC that is that's allowed. I think CBD is like 0.03.
CBD is simply another cannabinoid. So you have THC and you have, the plant contains all kinds, they're called cannabinoids, but THC is the one that gets you inebriated. So that's the one that you kind of have to be careful. But in the therapeutic program, there are some products that have high THC. If you take that, you're going to be inebriated. Now, for my cancer, I take a product that's 50% THC, but I take a little tiny amount, and I take it at night so I can sleep it off. And the other thing with a product being high in THC is the first time you use it, you're going to be knocked off your block. You're going to be very drowsy and everything. And then you're going to learn, just like we learned when we started with whiskey or scotch or anything like that, you don't take as much the next time because you don't like that feeling, So CBD is a non-euphoric cannabinoid that's used, it's used to relax the body. It's used a lot for muscle relaxation. But if you have pain, you have to have some THC. Not much, but some.
Okay, thank you. That's all the pot questions for today. Is it relative to the bill or about, okay. Wait, one more, go ahead.
So is this essentially housekeeping legislation? It seems like we're just trying to clean up an oversight.
It is housekeeping. I wouldn't classify it as an oversight as more as it was an unnecessary protection that people believed were needed for the program when the program was initiated. Program's been running fine for 11 years. We don't have the criminals and the monsters that were anticipated. So this is just making it more just. It's just making it more just. That wasn't good, but it's making it more socially acceptable. That's wrong too. It's making it more fair. There we go.
Taking away the double penalty.
There you go.
With that, I close the public hearing. Take a 15-minute recess, and we'll be right back. They're not here today.
Jennifer's not here.
Bradley's not here.
Bradley's
No.
not here.
Yeah. Okay, I'm opening an executive session on House Bill 1295, and I move OTP. Seconded by Representative Harry Gathright. I'll speak to the motion. After hearing the testimony on the bill, it does not make any sense to have an extra or an additional penalty or a more enhanced penalty for someone who sells their cannabis versus someone who sells their other prescription drugs. This seems to have been targeted just at cannabis patients. It's already illegal to sell marijuana. So having an enhanced penalty for that versus someone who, for example, sells their oxycodone doesn't make any sense at all. So that's why I would support passing the bill and encourage others to do so as well. Would you like to speak to your second, Representative Harry Gathright?
I agree with you 100%. Thank you.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Motion on the floor is ought to pass.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Pratt,
Not in the room.
Representative Sytek, Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Reed,
Yes.
Representative Stone,
Yes.
Representative Tenzar,
Yes.
Representative Harriet Gathright, Representative Muse,
Yes.
Representative Bolden, Representative Murphy, also not here, Representative Newman.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell,
Yes.
Representative Selig,
Yes.
Representative Wheeler,
Yay.
Chairman Roy.
Chair votes yes.
Motion is unanimous.
What does it count?
16-0.
Motion passes 16-0, unanimous. Any objection to consent? Seeing none, it will go on consent. I hereby close the executive session on House Bill 1295 and open the public hearing on House Bill 1339 and invite the sponsor to introduce the bill.
Good morning, members of the Criminal Justice Committee. I'm introducing HB 1339 FN. I'm Representative John Stone, representing Sullivan 8. And basically, this bill, as filed, would involve a change in the background checks done by the state and by utilizing NICS. I have two amendments to this bill based on some conversations I had with constituents, some gun dealers and some other individuals who had concerns over the amended language. So one of the bills I have going to be submitting for the amendment is that we had some issues that arose last week during testimony on returning firearms. And the amendment that I have outlined, which is 531, basically I passed out to everybody this morning, would put some guardrails up for the returning of firearms. If anyone has any questions, I would most likely entertain them.
So we have two amendments. You're proposing to ignore 520 in favor of 531. Is that correct?
Yes, after discussion this morning with the dual amendments, it looks like I would like to request a subcommittee to further review 0531.
Okay. Can you just briefly tell us what the bill does as far as NICS goes?
The new amendment would end up utilizing NICS for the return of firearms and set parameters with a requirement of court dates, business days, to facilitate that. During some of the testimony we heard last week, which caused this amendment to be drafted, there was definitely some issues when it comes to the returning of firearms after someone is no longer considered to be prohibited.
Is this related to protective orders, or what is this related to?
Initially, it was under protective orders at 173B and also under 633-3A, which is also criminal proceedings such as bail orders and other issued statutory authority by the court. So it doesn't specifically apply only to 173B issues. It would refer to someone who perhaps is out on bail. They have gone to court. Their court, his charges have been dismissed, to facilitate their guns being returned.
Okay. Did you find out if this is an early bill or not?
This is not an early bill, therefore,
Okay.
we're not restricted on the timeframes to get it done.
Okay, I'll,
next week.
unless anyone has questions, I'll assign a subcommittee. We can dig into it further. Go ahead, Representative Sitek.
It's this, I don't see the connection between a background check and return of weapons. Is the nub of this that you would need a background check if your weapons are being restored? What's the nexus here?
Representative, what happens currently in the cases of a 173B, if you're under a protective order, that protective order expires. Once that order expires, as you heard testimony last week, or you may have not, if I can't recall if you were here or not, but an individual can go to a firearms dealer, purchase a brand new firearm that same day. However, the firearms that are being held by the police or by an FFL would actually be required to have a court order to release those firearms, which means a separate appearance before a court of jurisdiction to grant that.
Representative Muse?
I do have a question because one of your amendments seems to be almost like a completely different bill from the one you originally proposed. Amendment 2024-0531 on line 1 states, amend the title of the bill by replacing it with the following. And then on line 5, it says, amend the bill by replacing all after the enacting clause. I don't actually see anything in the amendment that contains anything from the original bill, unless I'm missing something.
No, the new amendment, which is the 531H, is that the one you're referring to? That one would be replacing the language itself. This is kind of a background issue, which should be germane to the original bill.
Your amendment actually replaces your bill.
Correct.
Okay.
It depends whether or not it's germane, whether or not it can be replaced the whole bill as long as it's germane to the topic of the original bill.
Which is using the state as well as NICS to restore firearms.
So that's pretty much the same subject. Okay, further questions? Okay, seeing none, I will appoint a subcommittee on this and I'll announce the names before we leave today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to testify in this bill who has not testified? Seeing none, I hereby close the public hearing on House Bill 1339, and I will open the public hearing on House Bill 1462 and invite one of the sponsors to introduce the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Criminal Justice Committee. I am Representative Linda Harriet Gathright out of Nashua, and I will be providing the information for this bill. The bill would mandate that law enforcement reports all suspected hate crimes to the Civil Rights Unit of the Attorney General's office within 72 hours. It would also mandate that the Attorney General's office create and maintain a public database of these hate crimes and submit an analysis of the data to the Governor, Senate President, and Speaker of the House on an annual basis. This database would not include any identifying information for either the victims or suspects in these cases. This legislation is necessary because currently there is no mandate for this information to be gathered or maintained by any law enforcement agency. Upon reaching out to various municipal police departments, none were able to detail a process they have for reporting these types of crimes. We worked with the Attorney General's office in drafting this language, and they have said they will be sending written testimony to the committee. And I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Representative. Are you in a position to answer questions on this?
No, I think that there are going to be folks after me that probably would answer them best.
The only one we have so far is, who?
They're coming.
Oh.
She just, okay,
Okay. All right, thank you.
thank you.
Oh, save him for last. Who? Representative Salig? Question for
This is
Linda?
one question.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to take a question. Thank you for taking a question, Linda. Representative Goth, right? I apologize. I just wanted to ask, knowing what you have gone through in Nashua, I wonder if you could illustrate for the committee what members of the city board in Nashua have gone through and some of the things that have happened that caused you to bring this bill forward.
Well, I can probably I've been here since 79, and I probably can give tons of examples of things that have happened that have not gone into this category, that should have gone into this category, and we should have records of it. And around hate crimes. And I think even last year, I think when we had a representative, that there was graffiti put on the side of a building downtown in Nashua, you know, speaking of him, and he was Latino. So we've looked at, we have currently today, there's a Black restaurant in one of downtown in Nashua, and they actually plastered the N-word all over his property and his business. So for us, we feel that we're not getting the data captured where it needs to be captured. And that should be state data that's captured for hate crimes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Salig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Lauren Selig. I represent Durham, which is Stratford County District 10. And I am fully in support of this bill. I have personally been the victim of hate crime activity at various points over the course of my life, including when I was 8 years old and had someone spray paint our driveway with a 20-foot swastika and Jews go home. I did not live in New Hampshire at that time, but it was handled by the local police department saying basically, oh, that's too bad. And there was no further action taken. Wasn't reported anywhere, recorded anywhere. We know from organizations outside of New Hampshire that, for example, crimes of anti-Semitism have increased tremendously in the past several years. But it's not tracked in New Hampshire as a New Hampshire specific resource. We know that hate crimes against people of color have increased across the state. But again, there's no specific data. And without data, we don't have a way to address it, right? I had been hoping to add to this bill something requiring school districts to report incidents at their schools, and discovered some technicalities that we have to work through before we can do that. But the reality is that these incidences are continuing to happen. There isn't great record keeping. There's not a great way to see what the trends are so that we can work on ways to address it, hopefully stop the cycle of hate crimes, and look for ways to remedy the issue. And so I think it's really important that we create a better and stronger database by having this go to the AG's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Selig. I'm wondering, I know, we had spoken about the process of restorative justice. What we call it in our school district is restorative community. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about compiling the data, what we're thinking about we need to do with that is target law enforcement. But I think there are other alternatives, and I'd love for you to speak to that, because this kind of notion of restorative justice is just that, especially for youth who may be doing, for lack of a better way, dumb kid stuff that ends up, that is considered a hate crime, and in other ways that we can address that and help to remedy the problem.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not an expert in the law. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to pretend to be, but we know that juveniles at a certain age are sometimes charged as adults, and including hate crimes, which also have federal implications, but beyond just New Hampshire implications. Restorative justice models look at finding ways of having people identify why they created a problem or why they took an action that they did, and then making whole the person that they damaged. So, for example, if someone hung a noose in front of someone's home and caused them trauma and fear as a result of the noose and words that might be affiliated with it, we might, we could punish them by giving them a fine, assessing them a fine, or giving them jail time, which may or may not, depending on the levels of it, may or may not accomplish a goal of having them no longer commit those kinds of hate crimes. Whereas a restorative model would allow us to help them to identify the cause of it. I don't know that goes directly to this bill.
No.
But I think that by tracking, like if there are pockets of crime, like if we know, for example, that in one community it's happening a lot, then maybe we look at what are the dynamics in that community that can be repaired.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to what this data is useful for.
Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Newman.
I just wanted to verify that there's no identifying data in this, that it's a random number that would just describe what happened.
Right. It's a random number, but perhaps, like if we're seeing, for example, that in one town or community there's a huge number and in other towns there aren't, then we have a better idea of how to address and look at
Thank you.
resources. Thank you.
Chair calls Representative Perez.
Thank you again for allowing me to speak. My name is Maria Perez. I'm a state representative from District 43 in Milford. I'm here to speak in support of 1462. One of the reasons that I'm supporting this bill, because probably many of you know, I was a victim of a couple times already harassment because of my background. And many people in my culture, they've been getting emails, hateful emails, telling them that they need to go back where they came from, or they don't have the right to be alive. A couple months ago, I received an email from a white nationalist group here in New Hampshire telling me that my family needs to go back to Cuba, and then I'm a mestizo, just because my mom is an indigenous person and my dad is a white person. And then my family is not welcome here. And then he put my personal information in a website, which is very dangerous. That puts my family in danger. And this is not the first time that this person is doing it. It's been happening a couple times. And every time that I go to the police department, what I've been told is like, please come back and tell us when something real happened. So that means I have to wait till I get hurt, or one of my relatives get hurt, for someone to do something about hateful and hate crimes here in New Hampshire. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this, because I'm not the only one. Many families going through this, and people not paying enough attention. People think that New Hampshire is safe for people who look like me, but it's not. We have a lot of hate, and it's happening more and more. And people now feel like they can be more vocal about it. Please pay attention. We need to keep people safe. We're not here to erase anyone. We're not here to say I'm better than you or you're better than me. I just want to have an equal rights like everyone else. I don't feel safe anymore, to be honest. Every time that I come in and testify, or every time that I vote in a bill, my name gets put in public. and sometimes not in the right way. I don't feel safe. Hate crimes are happening and it happen more because people feel they have the right to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair recognizes Linz Jakehouse.
Hello, members of the committee. My name is Linz Jakehouse, and I live in Dover, and I am a queer, non-binary trans person who is a co-founder of 603 Equality, a statewide advocacy organization for LGBTQ Granite Staters. I want to thank all of the reps for introducing this bill after I approached Representative Murray wanting to make hate crime information more transparent. I've been involved with LGBTQ community organizing in New Hampshire since 2017 and have been called upon many times to rally trained de-escalators and community members to respond to hate activity. I was somewhat surprised to find out that local law enforcement in New Hampshire are not even required to report hate crimes to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office. It's clear that we need to take some steps toward better data collection and transparency. I feel generally safe in my community of Dover as a white queer person who isn't often seen as transgender or non-binary, but that is not true for many others. No matter who we are, whether we're Black, Indigenous, Latina, Asian, or white, LGBTQ, cisgender, or heterosexual, we all want to live in safe communities where we don't have to fear violence, where our voices are heard and our rights are respected. No one wants to live in a community where crimes based on hate and bigotry happen, but unfortunately, hate crimes have happened in many corners of our state. Some of these make the news, but not all do. Instead of turning away from these problems, everyone living in the Granite State, no matter their race, gender, sexual orientation, should have transparent information about the hate crimes that are happening near them. Those targeted by hate crimes should also have their safety and privacy respected without being forced into news headlines. By creating a database that includes pertinent, anonymous information about types of hate crimes committed in towns and cities across New Hampshire, and by requiring the Attorney General to summarize and analyze hate crimes and report to the Governor, Senate President, and Speaker of the House of Representatives, we can begin to better assess and analyze the problem and help Granite Staters make informed decisions that may help them avoid violence. Thank you.
See no questions. Thank you for your testimony. Chair calls Captain Muzzy.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, my name is Victor Muzzy. I'm here to represent the New Hampshire Department of Safety on this topic, and would simply say that we have a neutral position, I guess, relative to this bill. What I can offer is currently under RSA 106B 14C, which is the Uniform Crime Reporting System statute. And I guess I'll read that in part, which says law enforcement agencies operating within the state of New Hampshire shall submit crime reports to the Department of Safety Division of State Police based on the specifications prescribed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Criminal Justice Information Services Uniform Crime Reporting Program. Full sentence there. Basically, the report, the RSA then goes on to talk about number of offenses and arrests and crimes occurring within jurisdictions, reporting requirements relative to when those will be compiled, and it says July 1st of the following year. And we basically have to make those reports available to several entities and members of the public if, upon their inquiry. Section 2 talks about if a law enforcement agency has no records management system with NIBRS relative to NIBRS capabilities, that the Department of Safety would provide them a means by which to report. And that's important because currently, as part of that process and part of the NIBRS or UCR requirements, we and all agencies that operate in this state are currently collecting bias motivation as it relates to the following categories: race, ethnicity, and ancestry, religious bias, sexual orientation bias, disability bias, gender bias, and gender identity bias. So we're already capturing that anyhow. I suppose with respect to the bill, I think maybe that should be shared on a more intimate basis with the Attorney General's office. for the purpose that is outlined in the bill, but I thought it was important to at least articulate that we are capturing that now, and collecting that now, and obviously have to make it available to those that don't have a records management system in order to do that. And so I offer that to the committee for their consideration relative to what you've heard already today. And I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Is that information that you collect, or any of it, even the redacted versions of it, available to the public?
The tally, I guess, is available to the public by way of our NIBRS reporting website. And we have 2 areas now that we manage and maintain. One of those is more geared towards data analysts, I guess. It's a little bit harder to kind of sift through. It's not as pretty to look at, I guess, but it's there. We are currently working on what we call, with our vendor, it's a TOPS website, and that's theme-oriented. I forget what the acronym stands for, but ultimately it's a more user-friendly website that presents information in a little bit more of a, I don't want to say generic, but more easy to digest presentation. And we have 3 themes on there right now with the intent to expand that to 6. And that will include some domestic violence, and I forget what the 2 other categories are. And so we do have that, I'll say, publicly available. It's not in a desirable format, I suppose, but it is there. And so, but again, I think as I understand and read this bill, it sort of sounds like the intent would be to present that information to the AG's office, and then for them to draft or create a report that's a little bit more consumable, I guess, to those interested. And so,
Currently, this information is available, is it not, from the FBI, from their website? Doesn't it track, for example, you can sort how many crimes against who was the assailant, what was the weapon used, that type of thing?
Yes.
Would that information that's currently available from the FBI be any different than this?
Well, and what I can say is we have a repository that can be searched specific to New Hampshire, and which is separate really from the FBI's database.
Right.
The FBI's numbers, I guess, should include New Hampshire's. And so we have a third-party vendor that we work with that also works with the FBI, where we report and make those things available to our public, I guess. Sort of separate from the FBI, but yes,
I'm just
the numbers.
asking, is the information currently available, or would this be redundant or not? Would this be something new that we could?
I see this as sort of an add-on to what we're currently doing to maybe make it a bit more consumable and make it a bit more user-friendly or usable.
Okay.
I guess what we provide is basically a tally. You had this number of crimes that were reported as having this type of bias, and so it doesn't offer, I guess, the total picture that maybe the intent of this bill would, meaning it doesn't necessarily relate the victims and the suspects and the circumstances at the moment. So that's, I guess, an add-on to what we're currently doing. This is to maybe make that a little more robust.
My last question would be, how do, in other words, I want to be confident in the data that I get. So how does the state police or any department submit data with regards to a hate crime? Is it after it's investigated and it's actually been determined to be a hate crime, or just that there was an allegation that it was a hate crime? Because what we don't want is to get numbers from somewhere that just have allegations that it could inflate the numbers artificially.
Correct. And that was a thought that I had and we had discussed. And so at the moment, I'm not exactly sure if it's simply the fact that there was an allegation there, or whether it was determined, I'll say, through a conviction that it was in fact a hate crime. So I think we have to probably get a little bit more clarity around where that determination is made and how. If a victim is certainly reporting that, is that really what we intend to capture and report out on, or is the intent to capture and report out on proven cases, I guess, that were found to be, hate crime motivated?
I think a conviction would be too high of a bar because plea bargains happen and then it goes away. But I think there should be some type of bar, perhaps, that the public can have confidence in the numbers.
Right. And I don't, I guess it would be or case dependent or circumstance dependent to say, okay, just because it was reported this way through the investigation, they met this threshold, and therefore we can categorize it as a, I don't know what that threshold would be in the investigation, but certainly, I mean, a lot of this would be up to the victim's determination. It's how the victim feels given the circumstances, and through the investigation, I would assume it's not something just made up. It would have to be quantifiable. Certainly, an image painted on someone's driveway, I would think, is pretty clear and convincing to the law enforcement agency that, okay, yep. I guess it would be case specific, but
Okay.
probably you're right. Conviction level's too high. I think it needs to be through
Somewhere in the middle.
the investigation.
Representative Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. I'm hoping you can help me clarify something. So under RSA 651, and it's 651B6 and a whole bunch of numbers, it says when substantially motivated to commit the crime because of hostility towards the victim's religion, race, creed, sexual orientation is defined in RSA 2149. So this is under the extended term of imprisonment is what I'm looking at. So how would, if this were to be enacted, how would it be reported differently? Because I'm reading that it already is reported differently if there's an extended term of imprisonment for it.
I don't think this bill would cause it to be recorded any differently, but maybe summarized differently, or again, what we're currently reporting is just a tally to say this crime that was reported had a biased motivation. What I think the bill does is extend that to gather and track the surrounding circumstances, information about the victim, information about the suspect. And so certainly and I did glance this morning at the enhanced penalty statute that you're reading. I think the intent there is if at the conclusion of the trial, the finding is guilty and there is some provable element suggestive of a biased motivation or a hate crime, then I think that's what that statute is speaking to. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but
I'm not sure either.
okay, sorry.
Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I'm really concerned about, especially when we're talking about hate crimes, the prevention, right? We saw in our school district kind of an explosion for a while there of a variety of things that happened within the school system, but did not rise to the level of a police investigation. And so you've said, that this information is gathered. We've talked about kind of what the threshold is. I also think that that would be very important information to anonymously because, underage children, things like that. But that would also be useful information for us targeting prevention. And so I'm wondering, is that information, or to your knowledge, would information that is happening within the school district that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of an investigation, is that also quantified in a way that can be useful for targeting prevention?
Not that I'm aware of. What I would envision is if the district or the school thought it rose to the level to call the police, certainly if the police came and took a report and took that information, that would be the only way that the state, would end up, to my knowledge, with that at all. So if the school is privy to information that they don't believe rises to the level of calling the police, then I would say we would, through this means, would not have that information, which is arguably important, if that's the overall goal.
Thank you.
Representative Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. So just to clarify, if it's a juvenile offense, would that necessarily be tracked or not currently tracked?
If the suspect were a juvenile, it would be tracked. The difficulty would be is, certainly for this purpose, it would be anonymized anyways, relative to. So I think tracking it, whether the suspect is a juvenile or an adult, doesn't really matter for the purposes of this, because there is no PII associated with it. It's an instance of a hate crime. And so where normally if in an adult situation, we may release the arrestee's name and date of birth and information relative to that, we wouldn't release the juveniles now. Nothing would change relative to this. We still wouldn't do that, but this is not really what this is speaking to. It's generalizing the data, I guess, to see what's happening, right? So hopefully that answers the question, but I may be
Quick
more.
follow-up. So an example is call for criminal mischief on property. It's a swastika that's been spray painted. Is that going to be coded as a hate crime, or is it going to be coded strictly as a criminal mischief call
It's going to be coded as a hate crime.
currently?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Muse.
Just wanted to know if you could elaborate on what you mean by a tally. So for instance, when you say that a tally is publicly available, is that something like just the number of hate crimes?
It's an indications in the reporting of that event that there is some bias motivation.
Okay.
So it's fairly generic at the moment, meaning it's determined somewhere in the investigation. And so, the example that Representative Stone gave, certainly a smashed mailbox with no indication that it involves some bias is just that, criminal mischief. Criminal mischief that clearly has an indicator like an insignia that's offensive is going to be reported as that. And so current data gathering is whether or not it's present. It's a yes, no type answer. Is this investigation or is this crime or part of it motivated by some bias, yes or no? So it's kind of that generic, I guess, at the moment. So that's where the tally comes from. And that's broken down by offense for us. And we can break it down by a few other things, location and county and whatnot. But I guess it's sort of that simple at the moment to say. Now, relative to the bill, we obviously, in the confines of that investigation, have who the suspect is, who the victim is, and several other factors that this bill speaks to and putting that picture together a little better. But at the moment, is this crime bias motivated? If so, by what bias? One of the 6 or 7 that I presented.
Representative Muse, follow up.
Yeah. So I understand that there's probably more data that is available behind the scenes that you're not putting up in the public tally. Would it be possible, using the data that you collect now, to do something like, in addition to just simply tallying up the number of incidents, to be able to describe, for instance, where the communities where these incidents are taking place, or the counties where these incidents are taking place, which groups have been, how different groups are being targeted by these incidents, in a way that it would actually, let's say, let somebody, a member of the public, be able to look at a particular town or community to get an idea, are more hate crimes happening here than in other places?
Certainly, yeah. I think we can do that with what we currently capture in the way that it's being captured sort of behind the scenes. So to say the extent by which we can break that down and how many different ways, I can't answer that, but I think we have some room to be able to paint a clearer picture with what we are capturing and what our current capabilities are.
Thank you.
Representative Bolden.
Are there any downsides to this bill?
I think the only thing that I kind of noticed is, as I was reading through it, on line 15, it says the race of the suspects. And as long as unknown is okay for the purposes of the bill, that might be sufficient. And I say that because currently, according to FBI UCR NIBR's reporting, race is only required for arrests. And so if we're getting into reporting the race of suspects who in theory have yet to have been arrested for something, how do we capture that? Are we mandated to capture that because we believe it's a hate crime, and for the purposes of this bill, we should be asking those questions? Is it based upon the law enforcement's perception, or is it based upon the involved participants, their self-report of that information? And so not so much a downfall, I guess, but a point of clarity for the bill to say that's one of those difficult subjects. I guess it depends on the intent. I think it may have more value if it's based upon, for the purposes of the overall intent, if it's based upon the perception of the officer, but I know that that's a difficult topic also because we don't want to make that wrong. We don't want to have that information be inaccurate or incorrect. And so that, I guess, causes pause and not so much concern, but just an observation. The only other concern that I have is the format, in which this bill would expect us, and I guess I say us, the Department of Safety, to be able to convey this information to the Attorney General's office, only because we are the aggregator of that on a statewide basis. We're the point of contact for the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting program, and we administer that program. And so we spend a lot of time every year helping the local departments ensure the accuracy and timely submission of their data. And so I think making sure that the way that we're reporting that or able to report that to the Attorney General's office is in an easy format, in a format that's consistent with how we're currently gathering it and the ability for us to break that down. Otherwise, there may be some additional expenses if we have to reconfigure the current platform in order to correctly report out the way the bill would request. And the only other thing that I'm surprised there, and maybe there is a local department here that's going to testify to this, but certainly having them post this information on their website, I have to presume, is going to come at some cost. How that gets presented, when that gets presented, things like that. Certainly for us, I mean, we have a website, so we would certainly fall into that. And I guess I don't have an answer to that. I assume we have a webmaster, if you will, on standby, on salary or what have you, that probably wouldn't necessarily cost us anything directly. But I guess the logistics or the practical application, there's some, not concerns, but just considerations.
Thank you. Representative Newman.
I have a question about, I tried to find a definition of hate crime and could not find one in the law, but it took me to the part of the law that was, you talked about extended sentences. But then later you said that if there is not an arrest, if you don't arrest someone for the crime, it's just reported. Do you have any information at all that is provided to the Attorney General so the Attorney General could make a decision about whether something like that ought to be reported?
I'm not sure I understand, like that we're giving the Attorney General's office now?
No, I'm just saying that the bill as it's written says to the Attorney General will make the determination what needs to be reported. So he would have to know what kind of information is available.
Correct.
And my question is, do you have any kind of information that's available if an arrest is not made, or?
Yes, because the crime itself is still reported, and again, the way the current reporting process is happening is, if the investigating agency feels that the crime is motivated by some bias, even though an arrest is not made, that case is flagged with a yes, meaning that's one of our numbers in the tally. And it's broken down further by, well, which of those biases is it? And so the arrest is, I guess, kind of irrelevant for the purposes of reporting. My comment was relative to capturing the race of suspects. So if I simply have a suspect and I can't prove or feel like I can't bring the case forward and prosecute it, it still technically would be a reportable hate crime, in my opinion and definition, based upon the bill. But so I don't know if I muddied up my
that does clarify
concepts.
everything. I
Okay.
just wanted to make sure because, excuse me, just follow up. And so a race crime is typically the list that's in that is in the enhanced penalty.
Yes.
The normal list that goes along with that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair calls Grace Murray.
Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Grace Murray, and I'm from Amherst, New Hampshire. And I'm here on behalf of New Hampshire Youth Movement to ask that you support HB 1462. In my opinion, we should be doing everything we can to stop hate crimes, and I think the very least we could be doing is reporting them properly and in a way that can limit the amount that they happen. I'm here to make just 3 brief points, so I'll keep it short. Number 1, I think people need to make informed decisions about where they're moving and where they're living, and I think that this data is actually extremely important to that. Number 2, we need young people in our state, and this is an issue that is important to young people. And if we want to keep young people in our state, I think it's important we listen to the issues that they care about. And number 3, we need data to make good personal choices and good legislation. And I think it's impossible for us to expect you as our state legislators to make good legislation if you don't have the data, and if you don't have all the facts to support that. By acknowledging that hate crimes, by acknowledging crimes motivated by hatred of a certain people groups or identities exist, and by not reporting them properly, it can feel like the stance being taken is that this community doesn't need to be heard, or that they don't matter. Supporting this legislation is a good first step in rectifying that. Thank you, and I can take any questions if there are any.
Seeing no questions, thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
The chair calls Liam Megan.
Hello, my name is Liam McGann. I'm currently a resident of Concord, and I'm here speaking today as the general manager of a business that has been targeted by hate crime activity numerous times in the last 18 months, and as a queer transgender man who's lived in New Hampshire for my whole life. I'm sure many of you have probably heard about the incident that took place on Father's Day in 2023 outside of Teetotaler. If you haven't, I'll be brief. A known hate group, neo-Nazis from NS131, targeted our shop because of Drag Story Time, which we host once a month. They stormed the alley, they were banging on the windows, they were hailing Hitler, the whole thing. But it's not the only incident that has happened at my place of work. In November, the Proud Boys protested the first story hour we hosted at the new cafe. In March of 2023, an incendiary device was placed in the planters outside of the shop and set off during a drag show. In April of 23, a flyer circulated insinuating a summer of vengeance against Teetotaler because we have story time and drag shows for all ages. And in December of 23, a few days after the AG announced their investigation of the incident in June, a couple of men got into the story time and were disruptive, and we suspect they may be affiliated with what happened before. And just a few weeks ago, at our first story of 2024, the same men were actively outside who had disturbed the previous event. So I'm sure that some of you have heard of the big ones, but there are smaller things that happen. And so I think all of us here can agree on one thing, whether we're straight, queer, cisgender, transgender, black, Asian, white, immigrant, citizen, etc. We all want to live in a space that's safe and where we don't have to fear violence, and we want a safe place for our children to grow up, a safe place for our friends and family to gather. And I think having a database like this that's more accessible to the public, like Grace was saying, it's like to make informed decisions about where to move, where to work, where to go and spend time. I think that's really important, and I think everybody living in New Hampshire should be able to have more transparent information and versus just a tally. You know, the way it is now, most people aren't going to understand. You know, we all just had to ask him a bunch of questions to understand how the current system works. And so I think having a slightly more broken down and easier thing to understand for the lay person is essential. New Hampshire has a hate problem, and I believe that this is a first step towards solving that problem. And so please support this bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Representative Sytek.
Haven't they gotten tired?
You'd think so. You really would think so.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to testify in this bill who has not done so? Seeing none, close the public hearing. With that, I open the public hearing on House Bill 1502 and invite the sponsor to introduce the bill.
Chairman Roy, members of the committee, my name is Lex Berezhny and I represent Grafton District 11. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce HB 1502 relative to alcohol-related offenses and prohibitions. This bill came about after the police chief in my town received complaints of beer cans regularly appearing on the side of the road in specific areas of town. While investigating these incidents, it was determined that the prevailing reason people litter in this way is to avoid the open container law. Laws prohibiting open containers do not prevent people from having alcohol in the vehicle, but they do create a very strong incentive to toss containers on the side of the road to avoid enforcement and penalties, thus forming the impetus for this bill. 10 other states have some form of allowance on open alcohol containers. Alaska, Arkansas, Connecticut, Delaware, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Virginia, Tennessee, and West Virginia. One thing many of these states have in common with New Hampshire is that tourism is a major component of their economy. The argument on economic terms is simple. Allowing open alcohol containers in vehicles contributes to more alcohol consumption and therefore more revenue. While the original idea for the bill was just to repeal prohibition on open containers, we felt that a repeal should include alternative tools for law enforcement to take drunk drivers off the road. Parts 1 and 2 of the bill allow a police officer, upon already establishing reasonable articulable suspicion that a driver of a vehicle may be under the influence, to require the driver to submit to a horizontal gaze nystagmus test, the result of which could then be used to establish probable cause for further action. A horizontal gaze nystagmus test does not require the driver to exit the vehicle and is relatively simple to perform. Performing the test also provides more opportunities for the officer to interact with the driver and ascertain sobriety. In summary, open container prohibition creates an incentive to litter, while removing the prohibition could have positive economic impact on tourism. And to combat negative effects of repealing the prohibition, this bill includes an extra tool for police to assess drivers that may be impaired. I'm open to working with the committee on any amendments to, particularly for parts 1 and 2 of the bill, to reduce any possible Fourth Amendment concerns, but also part 3 if the committee feels some restrictions should remain related to open containers. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Representative Newell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. What we're talking about is kind of trying to guide behavior, right? If you're saying that people are more likely to throw their container out so that an officer does not see it because this law is this way, we're trying to encourage behavior. And I guess my question is, wouldn't being pulled over with an open container in your car also encourage the officer to detain you and to be more likely to go through that process of testing you and all that kind of stuff? Doesn't that kind of, I'm just wondering about, if we're encouraging behavior, wouldn't that also encourage people to want to throw the container out because they don't want to be tested in that way?
Thank you for the question. If I understand correctly, so an open container could be in the back seat, right? It could be somebody in the back seat that's drinking, not necessarily the driver. So just kind of going by, first principles thinking, if the goal is to prevent a drunk driver, right? That's the whole reason for all of these laws, is to prevent a driver behind the wheel being drunk. Then an open container law is kind of aside, you're hoping that there's a correlation between an open container in the vehicle or prohibiting open container would also prevent drunk drivers, but it's not, it's not one and the same, right? You can have an open container and it could be somebody else drinking in the vehicle, the passenger in the back, for example, and not the driver.
Can I follow up quickly? Thank you for that clarification. Is the premise that someone would have a half a bottle of wine in a bag in their back seat, and if they were thinking that they were going to be pulled over, they would reach into the back of the car and throw that out, and that's the problem that we're trying to address?
So, I mean, that's certainly possible. The specific issue that we had in Grafton is that people would throw mostly empty containers, right? So they would be drinking a beer while, in the vehicle, and then they would just toss it out, so there wouldn't be anything in the car afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Selig.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. I'm just looking up the details of how this test works because that was something I was unfamiliar with. It seems very similar to the test that is used often to determine if people have the ability to track their vision accurately, regardless of use of alcohol, but just people who have vision issues. Is there a way for someone to know whether it's someone who's under the influence versus someone who simply has visual tracking problems based on what's in here?
Thank you for that question. So the police already do that test. The difference is they have to ask the driver, and the driver can refuse unless they had probable cause, right? Unless they smell alcohol or there's other obvious signs that they're impaired. This would allow them to do the same test following the same procedure, but with a lighter, it would be articulable suspicion. So, for example, you're a police driving behind somebody and they're, swerving on the road. Now, the swerving could be because they're playing on their phone or kids are in the back or something like that, right? Not necessarily they're under the influence. So it allows them, but they have a suspicion that something's going on. So it would allow them to require to do that test, as opposed to currently where you have to have probable cause, right? They have to either smell alcohol, see somebody drinking, or something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair calls Captain Muzzy. Captain Muzzy, did you sign up for this? The chair recognizes Lieutenant Storm.
Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Chris Storm. I am from the Department of Safety Division of State Police. I am currently the Highway Safety Liaison for the State Police. I am also the state's Field Sobriety Coordinator for the whole state, and I can answer Representative Seelig's question that she had prior to that. First and foremost, the Department of Safety is opposing this bill, and I'll just read you some few notes that I put down. First of all, we'd like to thank them for supporting law enforcement in trying to reduce the number of DWIs that we have on our roadways. I would like to point out our concerns with the potential implications of suspending individuals for just refusing horizontal gaze and nystagmus on the side of the road. It's important to note that the refusal of HDN tests alone should not be the sole reason for suspending someone's license. There are various factors that should be taken into consideration when determining the administrative license suspension. It's essential for law enforcement to consider the totality of the circumstances and utilize a combination of tests and observations to make it fair, impartial, and accurate assessment of someone's impairment. Although HDN is an excellent test for detecting impairment, it's also important for law enforcement to conduct all standardized field sobriety tests. Just conducting horizontal gaze and nystagmus does not provide comprehensive assessment of that particular individual's impairment. Different individuals may exhibit varying signs of impairment, and relying solely on one test may not provide a complete picture of their condition. By conducting multiple field sobriety tests, law enforcement can gather accurate and reliable evidence to determine whether an individual is under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This approach helps to ensure that law enforcement makes informed decisions and upholds fairness and accuracy in their assessments. Conducting all field sobriety tests should also help minimize the potential of errors of that particular law enforcement officer. It is also very important to note that not all drug categories cause HDN. If law enforcement doesn't do all the field sobriety, it's possible to miss that particular individual that may be under the influence of drugs. This bill makes it clear that open containers are also an allowable thing. We oppose that for numerous reasons. One, we don't want open alcohol containers with that potential for any operator to actually drink alcohol while operating a vehicle that then may lead to impairment as they travel down our roadways. This bill makes it clear to take Representative takes impaired driving very seriously, but we need to address the refusal of implied consent as a whole in New Hampshire, as we are one of the worst states in the country as far as refusals go. There's currently a bill, Senate Bill 418, that was within the Senate that should be coming over here to the House, that addresses many of the issues that we're already very concerned about as far as the refusals go. So we ask that you support that bill. I will take any questions as far as field sobriety, as far as HGN goes, or the open container.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Currently, if you refuse the breathalyzer, your license is suspended. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
But if you refuse the field sobrieties, there's no consequence. That's a First Amendment issue. Is that correct?
So yes and no. So on the side of the road, you are correct. There is no penalty for refusing anything upon the side of the road. But the implied consent and that informed piece that we would have to then do on the side of the road also makes it very complicated and very convoluted, that we would have to inform somebody that they are required to do this, but then continue on with other standardized field sobriety tests on the roadway. So that would be very confusing, especially if that individual is under the influence of something. It would make it very confusing.
Gotcha. With regard to the horizontal gaze and nystagmus, and frankly the other tests as well, is it not common practice to ask first, do you have any medical conditions that would prohibit you from performing successfully on these tests?
Yeah, so in New Hampshire, we actually have a Supreme Court case called State versus Hood, and all police officers here in New Hampshire are trained under the standardized field sobriety testing battery, which is conducted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And that Supreme Court law says that we need to inform people and do everything exactly the way that we were trained on the side for those individuals on the side of the road. So the answer to your question is yes, there is a medical questioning that happens prior to administering standardized field sobriety.
And lastly, for me, I heard the sponsor say that you could perform the horizontal gaze and nystagmus test while the operator was seated in the vehicle. Is that's correct? Or?
So that the head has to be in line with the body to do that perfectly. So it would be very difficult if that operator was turning to the left and their head was not exactly in line with the body, because you can actually induce something called PAN, which is positional alcohol nystagmus. So they could actually increase what that individual looks like or actually decrease what you're actually seeing depending on the particular individual.
So that would cause the accuracy of the test to be thrown out the window.
Yes, if their head is not in line with the body, it absolutely is an inaccurate test.
Thank you. Further questions for the Lieutenant? Representative Saito.
Perfectly legal for me to drink a Coke while I'm driving, right?
Certainly is.
Why can't I have a Budweiser while I'm driving if I'm under 0.08 and not impaired?
Well, if you're not impaired, that's fine. But the problem with drinking in driving is each individual metabolizes alcohol differently, right? You could be increasing as you continue to drink, and as you go, as time goes on, while you have that open container and you're consuming alcohol, your blood alcohol, obviously, the more you consume, the higher it's going up.
I would also answer that question because I would say, because we said so. Representative No.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for taking my question. Just really quickly, if I were pulled over and I had, and my passenger had an open Budweiser or something, would you be more or less likely to test me and be suspicious of me driving under the influence?
So that's a great question. So twofold. Once, obviously, we'd smell the odor of alcoholic beverage coming from that vehicle, right? So it's very hard to determine exactly who that particular odor is coming from. So we would have to do some work. We'd have to ask some questioning, and we'd have to start by asking probably that individual step from the vehicle if they'd be willing to conduct field sobriety tests.
Thank you.
Lieutenant, is open container arrestable offense?
So obviously everything's an arrestable offense, but
Normally
we would just issue that individual a citation.
Okay, so how often in your experience do you run across people with a bunch of empty beer cans all over the backseat floor that does not result in an arrest? Is it
quite often?
Quite often. It's more normal that you don't arrest for that offense unless you have an OUI with it. Is
Yes, sir.
Thank you. See no further questions. Thank you. Oh, did you have? Okay. Who did you point out? Question? No? All right. Thank you.
Thank
Lieutenant.
you.
Sure. Absolutely. Any other people wishing to testify on this bill who have not testified on this bill? Seeing none, I hereby close the public hearing on House Bill 1502. And that concludes our business for today. Representative Sitek wanted to say something.
If I may address the committee and the lieutenant, in 1991, I know the representative who spoke against open container, and he lost to Karen Wadsworth before she was a clerk. She was a rep from Lebanon, or up that way, not Lebanon. Anyway, I made that point then. I make it again. I want to support law enforcement, but it just seems over the top. I could be a passenger drinking my Bud and it's still, I've said enough. Thank you.
Did you just say that you are going to lose your reelection bid? I'm not sure what you said.
Hello. Court out.
recognize Representative Sitek to make a motion.
I'm going to move that this bill be recommended as ITL
I'll second.
1502.
And seconded by Representative here at Gathright. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Sitek?
Yes. What we heard was that this was ostensibly a litter protection bill. That's not the right word. To prevent litter from people who are avoiding the open container prohibition. In the testimony from the state police, we heard that there is a practical problem in administering this test because you have to have the proper alignment in order that this eye test, I can't pronounce it at the moment, be effective and accurate. There are also constitutional problems in stopping somebody without initiating this kind of test without probable cause. And for that reason, this bill would require may not even be able to be saved with an amendment. With respect to the open container portion of the bill, it's really would be flogging a dead horse. It's already failed in my view, I will hope in the committee's view, on the grounds that I've just talked about. So that's my statement.
Thank you. Representative Gathright, would you like to speak to your second?
Yes, I agree with everything that the representative produced. It says here that what I liked about it was that he said that this was not a complete approach to the situation. So, but he also mentioned that they have a bill that they would like us to look at that's coming from the Senate that seems to be more complete. 1418.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Being none, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll. Motion on the floor is inexpedient to legislate for House Bill 1502.
Vice Chair Rhodes,
Yes.
Representative Pratt,
Yes.
Representative Sitek, Representative Prue,
Yes.
Representative Janvrin, Representative Mannion,
Yes.
Representative Reed, Representative Stone,
Yes.
Representative Chensar,
Yes.
Representative Harriet Gathright,
Yes.
Representative Muse,
Yes.
Representative Bolden,
Yes.
Representative Newman.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Newell,
Yes.
Representative Selig,
Yes.
Representative Wheeler, Chairman Roy,
Chair votes yes.
17-0.
17-0, unanimous, inexpedient to legislate. Any objection to consent? Seeing none, it will go on consent. House Bill 1502 is hereby closed. We'll see you all on Monday. Anyone cannot be here on Monday, please talk to your leader or to Representative Rhodes so we can get replacements for everybody.